The rain in the city didn't fall, it descended like a heavy, gray curtain, blurring the neon signs of the financial district into smudges of sickly light. Arthur Pendelton checked his watch for the 10th time in 3 minutes. 9:02 a.m. The subway had stalled between 42nd and 5th, a mechanical failure that felt like a personal conspiracy by the universe. He was running, his cheap dress shoes skidding on the slick pavement. His lungs burned, not just from the exertion, but from the humidity that clung to everything like a second, unwanted skin. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another frantic cog in the machine, a mid-level analyst desperate to keep his seat at the table. They wouldn't notice the way his eyes remained calm despite his frantic pace, or the way his posture, though hurried, lacked the submissive slouch of the truly desperate. Arthur had been at Apex Global Solutions for exactly 6 months. In that time, he had been the perfect nobody. He sat in a cramped cubicle, used a budget laptop, and ate lukewarm leftovers at a desk that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. It was a self-imposed exile, a social experiment demanded by the terms of his grandfather's eccentric will. To inherit the Pendelton empire, one must first understand what it feels like to be at the mercy of those who have forgotten the value of a man. He reached the towering glass monolith of the Apex building at 9:04 a.m. He didn't use the VIP elevators. He used the main bank, standing shoulder to shoulder with tired interns and cynical middle managers. When the doors opened on the 14th floor, the air changed. It was colder here, scented with expensive sandalwood and the sharp, metallic tang of high-end printers. Arthur walked toward his desk, but he didn't even get to put his bag down. 5 minutes, Pendelton. The voice was like a serrated blade. Arthur stopped. Standing by the break room entrance was Marcus Sterling, the senior manager of operations. Marcus was a man who wore his insecurities in the form of $3,000 suits that were slightly too tight and a spray tan that looked orange under the fluorescent lights. He was flanked by his usual entourage, 2 junior associates who laughed at all his jokes and a HR representative, Mrs. Gable, who looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "Good morning, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice level. He didn't pant. He didn't apologize immediately. He stood straight. The 7 train had a signal failure. "I can show you the transit alert." Marcus let out a short, barking laugh that echoed across the silent floor. Heads began to pop up over cubicle walls. The office lived for drama, it was the only thing that broke the monotony of spreadsheets. A transit alert? How quaint, Marcus sneered, stepping closer until he was inside Arthur's personal space. He smelled of espresso and an overbearing amount of cologne. "You see, Arthur, Apex is a high-performance engine. We are a Ferrari. And a Ferrari doesn't work if one of the bolts is loose. You aren't just late today. You were 3 minutes late last Tuesday. And 2 minutes late the Friday before that. I've stayed until 10 p.m. every night this week finalizing the merger projections for the Sterling account," Arthur reminded him gently. "I believe those 5 minutes were more than compensated for by the 15 hours of overtime I didn't bill." Marcus's eyes flashed with a flicker of genuine hatred. He hated Arthur. He hated that Arthur never looked intimidated. He hated that Arthur's work was flawless, better than Marcus's own work. "Oh, you think you're doing us a favor by doing your job?" Marcus turned to the HR representative. "Mrs. Gable, what does the handbook say about chronic tardiness during a probationary period?" Mrs. Gable cleared her throat, her voice clinical. "It is grounds for immediate termination without severance, provided the manager deems the behavior detrimental to office culture." "And I certainly deem it detrimental," Marcus said, his grin widening into something predatory. He reached over to Arthur's desk, picked up a cardboard box that had clearly been prepared in advance, and dropped it onto Arthur's keyboard with a dull thud. "You're fired, Pendelton. Effective 60 seconds ago." A collective gasp rippled through the office. Some people looked away in shame, others, like the junior associates behind Marcus, smirked. Arthur looked down at the box, then back at Marcus. Fired, Arthur repeated. The word felt strange on his tongue. Not painful, but liberating. The social experiment was supposed to last a year, but perhaps his grandfather hadn't accounted for just how rotten the core of this company had become. Is there a problem? Do I need to have security drag you out? Marcus asked, leaning in. You're a low-level analyst, Arthur. You're a decimal point in a budget meeting. You're replaceable. In fact, I've already got a replacement starting on Monday who can actually read a clock. Arthur felt a strange sensation in his chest, a cold, crystalline clarity. He had spent months watching Marcus bully the cleaning staff, belittle the interns, and take credit for the hard work of others. He had stayed silent to fulfill the terms of the will. But the will said he had to understand what it felt like. He understood. He understood that men like Marcus Sterling didn't build companies, they parasitically drained them. You're right about one thing, Marcus, Arthur said. He began to pack his few belongings, a framed photo of his late mother, a fountain pen that cost more than Marcus's car, though no one knew that, and a small, black notebook. Some things are indeed replaceable. People. Positions. Even, ownership. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. Still talking nonsense. Pack your trash and get out. You have 10 minutes before your badge is deactivated. Arthur didn't argue. He didn't beg for his job. He didn't point out that he had just saved the company $4 million in tax liabilities the previous night. He simply tucked the box under his arm. As he walked toward the elevators, the office was deathly quiet. He saw Sarah, the young intern who often worked late with him, looking at him with watery eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. He reached the lobby, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind him. The rain was still pouring. He stood under the awning of the building, the cardboard box getting damp at the edges. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second phone, not the shattered screen Android he used for work, but a custom-built, encrypted device with a titanium casing. He swiped it open. There was one contact in the favorites list, the butler. He pressed dial. It picked up on the first ring. Master Arthur, the voice was dry, British, and impeccably professional. I assume the weather in the common world is as dreary as ever. It's pouring, Thomas, Arthur said, watching a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class pull up to the curb. And the experiment is over. I've been released from my duties at Apex Global. I see. Shall I prepare the celebratory scotch? Not yet, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing as he looked up at the 14th floor of the skyscraper. Marcus Sterling fired me for being 5 minutes late. He told me I was a decimal point. A grave miscalculation on his part, sir. Indeed. Thomas, call the board of directors at Pendelton Holdings. I know we've been hovering around a 15% stake in Apex Global for the last quarter. I want that number changed. I want a controlling interest. 60% minimum. And I want the transaction finalized before the markets open tomorrow morning. It will be expensive, sir. To move that fast, we'll have to pay a significant premium over the market price. Arthur watched Marcus Sterling through the glass of the lobby, seeing the man laughing and shaking hands with another executive, clearly proud of his decisive leadership in firing a late employee. Pay whatever it takes, Thomas, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous velvet. I don't want the profit. I want the keys. I want to see the look on his face when the decimal point moves the entire company. Consider it done, Mr. Pendelton. Your car is at the curb. The door of the black Mercedes opened. A driver in white gloves stepped out, holding an umbrella. He bowed deeply as Arthur approached. Arthur tossed the cardboard box into the trash can on the sidewalk, keeping only the fountain pen and the phone. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "To the tailor," Arthur said, stepping into the scent of fine leather and silence. "I need a new suit. Something that looks like it owns the world. Because by 9 a.m. tomorrow, it will." As the car pulled away, splashing a wave of dirty rainwater onto the front steps of Apex Global, Arthur Pendelton leaned back and closed his eyes. The 5-minute sin was about to become the most expensive mistake Marcus Sterling ever made. The interior of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the rain-slicked streets Arthur had just left behind. The scent was a sophisticated blend of hand-stitched Napa leather and a hint of ozone from the climate control. Arthur leaned his head back against the headrest, closing his eyes. The adrenaline of the confrontation with Marcus was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that felt far more natural to him than the feigned submissiveness he had practiced for the last 6 months. "The apartment in Queens, sir." The driver, a man named Elias who had served the Pendeltons for 20 years, asked softly. "No, Elias," Arthur said, his voice regaining the resonant authority of a man born to lead. "The Queen's experiment is over. Take me to the penthouse at the Obsidian. And call ahead. I want the war room prepared." "Of course, Mr. Pendelton. Welcome back." As the car glided through the traffic of Manhattan, Arthur watched the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red. For 6 months, he had lived in a 40-square-meter walk-up, cooked his own ramen on a temperamental stove, and worried about his budget. He had done it because his grandfather, Silas Pendelton, believed that a king who doesn't know the weight of a peasant's crown is a tyrant in the making. Arthur had learned his lesson. He hadn't just learned about the struggle for survival, he had learned about the casual cruelty of mid-level power. He had seen how men like Marcus Sterling used their tiny slivers of authority to crush the spirits of those beneath them, not for the sake of the company, but for the sake of their own fragile egos. The Obsidian was a needle of black glass and steel that pierced the clouds. As the car pulled into the private underground garage, the elevator was already waiting, its doors open like an invitation. When the doors opened on the 90th floor, Arthur was met by Thomas. Thomas was 60, moved with the grace of a panther, and wore a tuxedo that looked like it had been painted onto his frame. He held a crystal tumbler of 30-year-old Macallan in one hand and a tablet displaying flickering green stock tickers in the other. "The world was surprisingly affordable today, sir," Thomas said, handing Arthur the drink. Arthur took a sip, the peat and oak warming his throat. Status report. Apex Global Solutions is currently trading at $42.15 per share, Thomas began, leading Arthur into a room that looked less like a living space and more like a high-tech command center. Floor-to-ceiling screens displayed the intricate web of Apex's ownership. The company is bloated, poorly managed, and currently suffering from a minor PR dip after that botched tech rollout last month. The board is nervous. They are ripe for the picking. Arthur sat in a chair made of hand-buffed aluminum and black leather. Who holds the largest blocks? The Vanguard Group and BlackRock hold about 12% combined. They won't sell unless the premium is astronomical. However, Thomas tapped the screen, highlighting 3 names. The old guard: Whitaker, Henderson, and Thorne. They hold a combined 32%. They've been looking for an exit strategy for months. They think the ship is sinking. Contact them, Arthur commanded. Offer them 40% above the closing price. Tell them the offer expires at midnight. If they hesitate, remind them that I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands they used to hide the dividends from the 2024 merger. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Leverage, sir. So soon? I don't have time for a polite courtship, Thomas. I want to be the majority shareholder by the time the sun rises. I want Marcus Sterling to wake up in a world I own. Understood. And the remaining 13% to hit your 60% goal. Buy it on the open market through our shell corporations in Singapore and London. Do it in small, rapid bursts to avoid triggering an SEC red flag until it's too late for the board to mount a defense. By the time their lawyers wake up, I'll have the keys to the front door. For the next 6 hours, the penthouse was a hive of silent, digital warfare. Arthur sat at the center of it, his eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. He watched as his wealth, a force of nature that had been dormant for half a year, began to move. Millions of dollars flowed across borders in seconds. At 11:45 p.m., a notification pinged. "Whitaker has cracked," Thomas announced. Henderson and Thorne followed suit 5 minutes later. "They were terrified, sir. They thought you were a hostile corporate raider from the east." "In a way, I am," Arthur muttered. By 2 a.m., the final tally was in. Pendelton Holdings, through its various subsidiaries, now controlled 61.4% of the voting stock of Apex Global Solutions. "You are now the chairman of the board, Mr. Pendelton," Thomas said, bowing slightly. "And the majority owner. What are your instructions for the morning?" Arthur stood up, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, and the city below was a carpet of diamonds. "Prepare the legal team. I want the termination papers for Marcus Sterling drafted and ready. Not for performance, I want him fired for moral turpitude and gross incompetence. I want to ensure his non-compete clause is so tight he can't even get a job flipping burgers in this tri-state area. And the late policy he was so fond of." Arthur smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. "We'll address that in person. Thomas, call my tailor. Tell him I need the Vanta black 3-piece. The one with the silver pinstripe. I want to look like the eclipse that's about to swallow Marcus Sterling's career." "Excellent choice, sir. Shall I arrange for the fleet?" "No. Just the Rolls-Royce Phantom. And tell the security detail to meet me at the Apex building at 8:50 a.m. I want to be exactly 10 minutes early." Arthur spent the remaining hours of the night not in sleep, but in preparation. He reviewed the files of every employee at Apex. He looked at the salary of the janitor he used to talk to, a man named Bill who was struggling to pay for his daughter's tuition. He looked at Sarah, the intern who had been bullied by Sterling. He saw the systemic rot, the way the company's profits were being funneled into executive bonuses while the actual workers were being squeezed for every second of their lives. He wasn't just returning for revenge. He was returning to perform surgery on a sick institution. At 7 a.m., the sun began to peek over the Atlantic, casting long, sharp shadows across Manhattan. Arthur stood in front of a full-length mirror. Thomas helped him into the suit. The fabric was a marvel of engineering, softer than silk, but with a structure that made Arthur look like he was carved from obsidian. He fastened the Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime around his wrist, a watch that cost more than the entire floor of cubicles he had worked in yesterday. He looked at the man in the mirror. Gone was the harried analyst with the damp hair and the worried expression. In his place stood the Pendelton heir. "The car is downstairs, sir," Thomas said, handing him a leather-bound folio containing the acquisition documents. "The board of Apex has been notified of an emergency meeting at 9:15 a.m. They are currently in a state of blind panic." "Good," Arthur said, adjusting his cufflinks. Panic is a great motivator for honesty. As he walked toward the elevator, Arthur felt a strange sense of calm. He thought about the cardboard box he had thrown in the trash yesterday. He thought about Marcus Sterling's smug face and the scent of his cheap cologne. Yesterday, Arthur had been 5 minutes late, and it had cost him his job. Today, he was the owner of the clock, and he was about to show Marcus Sterling that time had finally run out. The elevator descended, and as the doors opened to the lobby of the Obsidian, the staff stood at attention. Arthur didn't see them as cogs, he saw them as people, but people who knew that a storm was coming. He stepped into the crisp morning air. The Rolls-Royce was idling at the curb, its spirit of ecstasy ornament gleaming in the morning light. To Apex Global, Arthur said to the driver. "And drive slowly. I want to enjoy the view." The city was waking up. Thousands of people were rushing to jobs they hated, for bosses who didn't appreciate them. Arthur watched them from behind the tinted glass. He couldn't save everyone, but today, he was going to save one office from the tyranny of a small man. As the car turned onto the street where the Apex building stood, Arthur saw the familiar glass facade. He saw the employees filing in, their heads down, their shoulders slumped. Among them, he spotted Marcus Sterling's bright orange sports car pulling into the executive parking spot. Arthur leaned back, a faint smile on his lips. Showtime. The lobby of Apex Global Solutions was a cathedral of glass and cold, polished marble, designed to make the individual feel small and the corporation feel eternal. At 8:50 a.m., it was a hive of frantic activity. Hundreds of employees streamed through the turnstiles, their faces buried in smartphones or obscured by the steam rising from cardboard coffee cups. It was a sea of beige, gray, and navy blue, the uniform of the corporate foot soldier. Among them stood Marcus Sterling. He was positioned near the security desk, leaning against the mahogany counter with the practiced nonchalance of a man who believed he owned the air everyone else was breathing. He was regaling a small group of junior executives with the story of yesterday's disciplinary triumph. "It's about the principle," Marcus said, adjusting his silk tie in the reflection of the glass. "If you let one analyst slide on 5 minutes, the whole structure collapses. You have to prune the garden if you want the roses to grow." Pendelton was a weed. A talented weed, perhaps, but a weed nonetheless. The junior executives nodded in synchronized sycophancy. One of them, a man named Miller who had often borrowed Arthur's data for his own reports, chuckled. "He looked like he was going to cry when you tossed that box at him, Marcus." "Pure poetry." "He didn't cry," Marcus corrected, a brief flicker of annoyance crossing his face as he remembered Arthur's unsettlingly calm smile. "He was in shock. That's what happens when reality finally hits a dreamer. Now, let's get upstairs. We have the emergency briefing at 9:15. The word is we've been bought out by a private equity titan. This is our chance to show the new owners that we've cleared out the dead weight." Just as Marcus turned toward the elevators, the heavy revolving doors at the front of the building slowed to a halt. Outside, the morning traffic seemed to part like the Red Sea. 3 black Cadillac Escalades, their windows tinted to a charcoal abyss, pulled up to the curb in perfect formation. They didn't park, they occupied the space. From the lead and rear vehicles, 4 men in charcoal suits and tactical earpieces stepped out. They moved with a military precision that silenced the chattering crowd in the lobby. Then, the rear door of the middle vehicle, a silver-black Rolls-Royce Phantom, opened. A pair of bespoke, hand-burnished oxblood leather shoes hit the pavement. Then came the suit, the Vanta black 3-piece Arthur had ordered. It was a black so deep it seemed to absorb the very light of the lobby, making Arthur look like a silhouette cut out of the fabric of reality. He didn't look like an analyst. He looked like an event. Arthur Pendelton stepped into the lobby. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. The frantic clicking of heels stopped. The rustle of newspapers ceased. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to drop an octave. Arthur walked with a measured, predatory grace. Beside him walked Thomas, carrying a slim carbon fiber briefcase, and a phalanx of 3 high-priced attorneys from the most prestigious firm in the city. Marcus Sterling stood frozen by the elevators. His mouth hung slightly open, his brain struggling to reconcile the image of the man he had fired 24 hours ago with the titan walking toward him. "Arthur," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. The Marcus Sterling mask of confidence was slipping, revealing the terrified middle manager underneath. What is this? What are you doing here? You were terminated. You're trespassing." Arthur didn't stop until he was exactly 3 feet away from Marcus. Up close, the difference was staggering. Marcus looked like a child playing dress up in his father's closet. Arthur looked like the man who owned the closet, the house, and the street it sat on. "Good morning, Marcus," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the lobby. It was the voice of a man who no longer had to raise it to be heard. "You're looking vibrant today. Is that a new tan?" Marcus's face turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his orange-tinted skin. "I'm calling security. You can't just walk in here in a rented suit and play act. You're a nobody. Security. Get this man out of here." The two lobby security guards, men Arthur had shared coffee with dozens of times, took a step forward, looking conflicted. "Stand down, boys," Arthur said, not even looking at them. One of Arthur's personal security detail stepped in front of the lobby guards. He didn't draw a weapon, he simply unbuttoned his jacket to reveal a gold badge and a set of credentials that made the lobby guards freeze in their tracks. "This is Arthur Pendelton," Thomas announced, his British accent cutting through the tension like a piano wire. "He is the chairman of Pendelton Holdings. As of 2 a.m. this morning, Pendelton Holdings is the majority shareholder of Apex Global Solutions. Mr. Pendelton is not trespassing. He is inspecting his property." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Miller, the sycophant who had been laughing moments ago, looked like he was about to vomit. Sarah, the intern who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated joy. Arthur looked at his watch, the Patek Philippe gleaming under the lobby lights. "It's 9:05 a.m., Marcus. According to your own logic, being 5 minutes late is a sin against the corporate engine. I arrived at 8:50. I believe that makes me 15 minutes early to my own takeover." Marcus was shaking now. His hands were stuffed into his pockets to hide the tremors. This is a mistake. The board they wouldn't sell to you." "The board didn't have a choice, Marcus," Arthur said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Marcus could hear. "When you fired me, you ended the only thing that was protecting this company, my curiosity. I wanted to see if there was anything worth saving here. Yesterday, you showed me there wasn't. You showed me that this company is run by small men who fear talent and worship punctuality over productivity." Arthur turned his gaze to the lobby at large. "Everyone, listen up." The entire office stood paralyzed. "My name is Arthur Pendelton. For the last 6 months, I sat in cubicle 402. I ate the same stale sandwiches as you. I listened to the same condescending speeches from management. That ends today. There will be an all-staff meeting in the atrium at 11 a.m. Between now and then, I suggest you go back to your desks and think about what kind of company you actually want to work for. Because the old Apex Global is dead." Arthur turned back to the elevator bank. The doors of the executive lift, the one he had been forbidden from using for 6 months, opened with a soft chime. "Marcus," Arthur said, gesturing toward the open doors. "Are you coming? We have a board meeting. And I believe you're on the agenda." Marcus moved like a man walking toward a gallows. He stepped into the elevator, followed by Arthur, Thomas, and the legal team. The door slid shut, sealing out the stunned silence of the lobby. Inside the elevator, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Marcus stared at the floor, his breathing shallow. Arthur looked at the brushed steel walls, adjusting his cuffs. "Nice tie, Marcus," Arthur remarked casually. "Is it Hermes? It looks a bit, last season." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't. When the doors opened on the 50th floor, the executive suite, the scene was one of pure chaos. Board members were sprinting between offices, secretaries were frantic on the phones, and the CEO of Apex Global, a man named Sterling Superior, Robert Vance, was standing in the middle of the hallway looking like he had just seen a ghost. "Arthur," Vance whispered, recognizing the face but unable to process the aura. "Robert," Arthur said, walking past him without stopping, heading straight for the chairman's office, the massive corner suite with the view of the park. "We're 5 minutes behind schedule. Let's not be late. We wouldn't want to upset Mr. Sterling's delicate sensibilities, would we?" Arthur pushed open the double doors of the boardroom. The directors were already there, seated around a table made of a single slab of ancient redwood. They rose as one, their faces a mask of terror and forced respect. Arthur didn't go to his old desk. He didn't go to the visitor's chair. He walked to the head of the table, pulled out the high-backed leather chair, and sat down. He placed his hands on the table, the light catching the Pendelton signet ring on his finger. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the room. "And I use that term loosely. My name is Arthur Pendelton. I own 61% of this company. I've spent the last 24 hours looking at the books, and the last 6 months looking at your faces." He leaned back, a cold, sharp smile playing on his lips. "Before we discuss the future of Apex Global, we need to handle a small matter of personnel. Marcus, stand up." Marcus, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper near the door, stood up. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Yesterday," Arthur said, his voice echoing in the mahogany room, "you told me that I was a decimal point. You told me that I was replaceable. You told me that I was dead weight." Arthur looked at the board members. "Does anyone here agree with Mr. Sterling's assessment of my value?" The silence was deafening. Robert Vance looked at his shoes. The other directors suddenly found the grain of the redwood table fascinating. "No?" Arthur asked. "That's disappointing. Because I'm about to prove Marcus right. In a corporation, everyone is replaceable. Especially those who think they aren't." Arthur nodded to Thomas, who opened the briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper across the long table toward Marcus. "That," Arthur said, "is your termination notice. It is effective as of 5 minutes ago. You are being fired for gross mismanagement, creating a toxic work environment, and my personal favorite, failing to recognize a majority shareholder when he's sitting in front of you." Marcus reached for the paper, his hand shaking so hard it rattled. "You can't, the severance package, my contract." "Read the fine print, Marcus," one of the attorneys spoke up. "Section 12, Clause B, moral turpitude and conduct unbecoming. Your treatment of the staff over the last 3 years has been meticulously documented by Mr. Pendelton during his tenure here. You are being fired for cause. There is no severance. There is no bonus. And your non-compete will ensure you don't work in this industry for the next 5 years." Arthur stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window. He looked out at the city he now officially shared a name with. "Security is waiting outside the door, Marcus. They have your box. The same one you gave me yesterday. I took the liberty of putting your Employee of the Month plaque in it. I thought you might want a souvenir of the day you lost everything." Marcus Sterling looked around the room, searching for an ally, a friend, a single face that would speak for him. He found nothing but cold, corporate indifference. He had spent his career building a world based on fear, and now, he was drowning in it. Without a word, Marcus turned and walked out of the boardroom. As the doors closed behind him, Arthur turned back to the remaining board members. "Now," Arthur said, his voice turning from ice to steel. "Let's talk about the rest of you. I've looked at the bonuses you gave yourselves while the pension fund was stagnant. I've looked at the consulting fees paid to your brothers-in-law. Robert, sit down. We're going to be here a long time." Arthur Pendelton had been fired for being 5 minutes late. But as he looked at the terrified men in front of him, he realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The Pendelton era had begun. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut, sealing Marcus Sterling's fate on the other side. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive stationery and the cold, metallic sweat of men who realized they were no longer the hunters, but the prey. Arthur Pendelton remained standing at the head of the table. He didn't sit. Standing gave him a height advantage that made the seated directors look like children waiting for a lecture. He adjusted the cuffs of his Vanta black suit, the silver pinstripes catching the morning light like razor wire. "Robert," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You look pale. Perhaps you should have taken that 6-week sabbatical to the Maldives you were planning to bill to the company's research and development fund." Robert Vance, the CEO of Apex Global, gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. "Arthur. Mr. Pendelton. Let's be reasonable. You've had your fun. You've humiliated Marcus and frankly, the man had it coming. He was a blunt instrument. But running a multi-billion-dollar firm isn't the same as playing undercover boss. You need us. You need the institutional knowledge." Arthur let out a soft, dry laugh. "Institutional knowledge? Is that what you call it? I call it a roadmap of rot." He signaled to Thomas. With a practiced flick of his wrist, Thomas slid a thick, black leather folder in front of each of the 7 remaining board members. On the cover of each folder was a single name embossed in gold. "Open them," Arthur commanded. As the directors turned the pages, the room descended into a frantic rustle of paper. Arthur watched their faces. Vance's jaw dropped. Thorne, the head of legal, turned a sickly shade of gray. Whitaker, the CFO, looked like he was having a minor heart attack. "What you see in front of you," Arthur began, pacing the length of the window, "is the result of my last 6 months. While I was sitting in cubicle 402, I wasn't just filing spreadsheets. I was auditing you. Every business dinner that was actually a family reunion. Every consultancy fee paid to a shell company owned by your spouses. Every talented employee you passed over for promotion because they didn't play golf with you." He stopped behind Robert Vance's chair and leaned down, whispering near his ear. "I didn't just buy the shares, Robert. I bought the evidence. I know about the Blue Horizon project, the one you reported as a failure to the shareholders while you secretly sold the patents to a competitor in Singapore." Vance's breath hitched. That's a gross misinterpretation of." "It's a felony," Arthur interrupted, straightening up. "In most jurisdictions, it's called corporate espionage and embezzlement. In this room, however, I'm going to call it leverage." Arthur walked back to the head of the table. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to perform a radical amputation. The board as it stands is dissolved. Effective immediately. You will all sign the resignation letters in the back of those folders. In exchange, I will refrain from handing these files over to the SEC and the Department of Justice. You will leave with your reputations intact, but your stock options are forfeited back to the employee pension fund." "You can't do that," Thorne shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "The bylaws require a 90-day notice for." "The bylaws," Arthur's lead attorney, a woman with eyes like flint, stepped forward, "were amended at 2:15 a.m. this morning by the majority shareholder. Mr. Pendelton has the authority to remove any officer for acts of moral turpitude. We have 3 terabytes of turpitude ready to go, Mr. Thorne. Would you like to see the video of your last business trip to Macau?" Thorne sat back down as if he had been punched. The defiance in the room evaporated, replaced by a desperate, suffocating silence. "Sign," Arthur said. One by one, the pens scratched against the paper. The old guard of Apex Global, men who had spent decades climbing the ladder by stepping on the fingers of those below them, signed away their power in less than 3 minutes. "Thomas, escort these gentlemen to the service elevator," Arthur said, not looking at them. "I don't want them seen in the main lobby. It's a place of business, not a funeral home. As the disgraced executives were let out, Arthur felt a strange sense of exhaustion wash over him. It wasn't the fatigue of work, but the weight of the Pendelton name. His grandfather had been right, the view from the top was lonely, and the air was thin. But he wasn't done yet. "Thomas," Arthur called out as the doors closed. "Get Sarah on the line. And the janitor, Bill. Tell them to come to the boardroom." 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. Sarah, the intern who had spent her morning crying in the break room, stood at the threshold. She was still wearing her cheap H&M blazer, her eyes red-rimmed. Beside her stood Bill, a man in his 60s with calloused hands and a faded green work uniform. Both looked terrified, as if they were about to be fired along with Marcus. "Mr. Pendelton," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Arthur's expression softened. The cold, obsidian mask he had worn for the board didn't melt, but it shifted. He gestured to the plush leather chairs that had just been vacated by billionaires. "Sit down, Sarah." "Bill. Please." They sat on the very edge of the chairs, looking around the palatial room as if they expected the ceiling to cave in. "Sarah," Arthur said, leaning against the table. "In the 6 months I worked next to you, I watched you do the work of 3 junior analysts. I watched you stay until midnight to fix Marcus's mistakes, and I watched him take the credit every single time. Do you know why I didn't say anything?" Sarah shook her head, unable to find her voice. "Because I needed to see if you would keep your integrity even when the system was rigged against you," Arthur said. "And you did. You never complained. You never cut corners. You just worked." He turned to Bill. "And you, Bill. I know you've been working double shifts because the company restructured the maintenance department to save a few pennies on the bottom line. I know you've been paying for your daughter's nursing school out of pocket." "I just do my job, sir," Bill said, his voice gruff but humble. "Exactly," Arthur said. "And that is exactly what this company has forgotten how to value. Sarah, as of this moment, you are the acting director of operations. You'll have a full team, a salary that reflects your actual worth, and the authority to fire anyone who treats an intern the way Marcus treated you." Sarah's mouth fell open. I'm just an intern, Arthur. I mean, Mr. Pendelton." "You were an intern," Arthur corrected. "Now, you're the future of this firm. And Bill, you're the new head of facilities. I want a full audit of the maintenance staff. We're hiring back the people Vance fired, and we're giving them a 20% raise. No one in this building works 2 jobs just to survive. Not on my watch." As the two of them sat there in stunned silence, a knock came at the door. It was one of the remaining junior managers, a man named Henderson who had survived the purge simply because he was too insignificant to be corrupt. "Mr. Pendelton," Henderson said, his face pale. "We have a problem. The news of the takeover has hit the wire. The stock is volatile. And, there's a group of investors downstairs. They're claiming that the buyout was a hostile act and they're threatening a poison pill maneuver to devalue the shares." Arthur didn't flinch. He walked over to the windows, looking down at the street where a small crowd of reporters was already beginning to gather. "A poison pill," Arthur murmured, a dark spark of amusement in his eyes. "They think they can kill the company to save themselves from me." He turned back to the room, his eyes scanning the faces of Sarah, Bill, and his legal team. The old guard thought they could fight him with paperwork and market manipulation. They didn't realize that Arthur Pendelton hadn't just bought a company, he had spent 6 months learning how to dismantle it from the inside out. "Thomas," Arthur said, his voice echoing with a renewed, lethal energy. "Call the press. Tell them the chairman will be making a statement in the lobby in 30 minutes. And tell the investors downstairs that if they want to swallow a poison pill, they're more than welcome to. But I'm the one who owns the antidote." He turned to Sarah. Ready to work. Sarah wiped her eyes, stood up straight, and for the first time, she smiled a sharp, intelligent smile that mirrored Arthur's own. What's the first move, boss? Arthur adjusted his tie one last time. The first move is simple, Sarah. We're going to show the world what happens when a decimal point decides to become the whole equation. As they walked out of the boardroom, Arthur didn't look back at the empty chairs of the powerful. He looked ahead, toward the elevators, toward the lobby, and toward the final reckoning that awaited him. The cleaning of the house was nearly complete. But the battle for the soul of Apex Global was just beginning. The lobby of Apex Global Solutions was no longer a quiet cathedral of corporate indifference. At 11 a.m., it had been transformed into a gladiator's arena. Dozens of news crews had set up their tripods, their lenses aimed at a makeshift stage positioned in front of the elevators. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool from the reporters' coats and the electric hum of broadcast equipment. Beyond the velvet ropes, the employees of Apex, hundreds of them, stood in a dense, silent crowd. They weren't working. They were waiting. They were the decimals Marcus Sterling had dismissed, and today, they were the witnesses to a revolution. In the center of the front row sat the investors' block, led by a man named Julian Vane. Vane was a legendary corporate raider, a man who looked like a hawk in a pinstripe suit. He was the secret architect behind the board's corruption, and he held a 15% stake that he intended to use as a weapon. "He's coming," someone whispered. The executive elevator pinged. The door slid open, and Arthur Pendelton stepped out. He didn't rush. He walked with the deliberate, heavy cadence of a man who knew that the world waited for him, not the other way around. To his left was Sarah, now dressed in a sharp, professional blazer Arthur had sent to her office an hour ago. To his right was Thomas, carrying the carbon fiber briefcase that contained the fate of the company. Arthur stepped onto the stage. The camera flashes were blinding, a strobe light effect that would have unnerved a lesser man. Arthur didn't even blink. He adjusted the microphone, the sound of his hand brushing the metal echoing like a thunderclap through the lobby. "My name is Arthur Pendelton," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "Yesterday, at 9:05 a.m., I was stood in this very lobby and told that I was a loose bolt in a Ferrari. I was told that 5 minutes of my time was worth more than the integrity of my character. I was fired by a man who didn't know my name, for a crime that didn't exist." He looked directly into the main pool camera. "But I didn't come back today for an apology. I came back to settle the bill." Julian Vane stood up from the front row, his voice cutting through Arthur's speech. "A moving story, Pendelton. Truly. A billionaire heir playing dress up in the slums. But let's talk business. You've overextended yourself. Your hostile takeover has triggered the shareholder rights plan, the poison pill. By midnight, we will issue millions of new shares to everyone except you, diluting your 61% stake into nothing. You'll be the majority owner of a worthless shell. You haven't saved this company, you've murdered it." A murmur of panic rippled through the employees. If the stock tanked, their 401(k)s and pensions would vanish. Arthur looked down at Vane with a look of profound boredom. "Julian, you always were a man who focused on the finish line without checking the track. Did you really think I spent 6 months in a cubicle just to learn how to use a photocopier?" Arthur nodded to Thomas, who opened the briefcase and handed him a single, red-stamped document. "The poison pill you're referring to is tied to the company's outstanding debt obligations," Arthur said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical tone. "Specifically, the $2 billion credit facility held by the Overseas Industrial Bank. You plan to call that debt, force a liquidity crisis, and then flood the market with diluted shares. It's a classic move. A bit dated, but classic." Vane sneered. "It doesn't matter if it's dated if it works." "It would work," Arthur agreed, "if the Overseas Industrial Bank still held the debt. But they don't. While I was working as an entry-level analyst, I spent my nights negotiating with the OIB's parent company. 2 weeks ago, Pendelton Holdings purchased 100% of Apex Global's debt. I am not just your majority shareholder, Julian. I am your only creditor. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the rain beginning to tap against the glass roof again. Julian Vane's face went from smug to ghostly white in a matter of seconds. You bought the debt. Vane stammered. Every penny of it, Arthur said. And as the creditor, I have the unilateral right to veto any shareholder rights plan that endangers the company's solvency. The poison pill is dead. And as of 11:05 a.m., so is your seat on any board associated with this firm. Thomas, please hand Mr. Vane his exit package. It's a list of the SEC violations we've uncovered regarding his insider trading. I suggest he leaves through the back door before the federal agents arrive at the front. Vane looked at the folder, then at the cameras, then at Arthur. Without a word, the hawk turned and fled, his entourage scurrying after him like rats from a sinking ship. The lobby erupted. It wasn't just a cheer, it was a roar of catharsis. Employees were hugging each other, Sarah was beaming, her eyes bright with tears. Even Bill the janitor, standing at the back with his broom, raised a fist in the air. Arthur raised his hand for silence. It took a moment, but eventually, the roar died down to an expectant hum. This company, Arthur said, looking out at the faces of the people he had worked beside, will no longer be called Apex Global Solutions. That name belongs to a culture of fear and ego. From this moment forward, we are Pendelton International. And we are going to do things differently. He paused, his gaze landing on the empty space where Marcus Sterling's office used to be. We are abolishing the probationary firing system. We are reinstating the pension bonuses that were stolen by the previous board. And most importantly, he smiled slightly, we are implementing a new flex time policy. Because I've learned that a person's value isn't measured by when they punch a clock, but by what they do while the clock is ticking. He turned to the cameras. To the other Marcuses out there, the managers who think power is a license to be cruel, watch your back. Because you never know if the person you're firing today is the person who will own you tomorrow. With that, Arthur stepped down from the stage. He didn't stay for the questions. He didn't stay for the handshakes. He had done what he came to do. As he walked toward the exit, the crowd parted for him. They didn't bow, but they looked at him with something far more valuable, respect. He saw Sarah and gave her a nod. She would handle the transition. She had the heart for it. Arthur stepped through the revolving doors and out into the crisp, cool air of the city. The Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb. But as he approached the car, he saw a figure sitting on a nearby stone bench. It was Marcus Sterling. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he was clutching the cardboard box Arthur had given him earlier. He looked small. He looked like the decimal point he had accused Arthur of being. Marcus looked up as Arthur approached. Arthur. I didn't know. Arthur stopped. He looked at the man who had tried to ruin his experiment. He didn't feel anger. He didn't even feel satisfaction. He just felt a strange sense of pity. That was your mistake, Marcus, Arthur said softly. You thought the suit made the man. You thought the title made the authority. You never bothered to look at the person behind the desk. What do I do now? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. I'm blacklisted. No one will hire me. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, the same amount Marcus had once docked from Arthur's pay for being late. He dropped it into the cardboard box. Buy yourself a watch, Marcus, Arthur said. And this time, make sure it's one that tells you when it's time to be a decent human being. Arthur stepped into the back of the Rolls-Royce. Elias closed the door, and the world became silent once again. Where to now, Mr. Pendelton? Elias asked. Arthur looked at the Pendelton signet ring on his finger, then out at the towering skyscraper that now bore his family name. He thought of his grandfather, Silas, and the lesson of the fisherman and the ocean. He had felt the waves. He had been tossed by the storm. And now, he was the master of the tide. To the cemetery, Elias, Arthur said. I have a report to give my grandfather. I think he'd be pleased with the results. The car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flow of the city. Arthur Pendelton leaned back, the hum of the engine a soothing vibrato. He had been 5 minutes late to a job he didn't need. But he was exactly on time for the life he was meant to lead.